So because I know as the day wears on, folks may have to duck out, and so and also I always forget to do this at the end of the day anyway, so while I'm thinking about it, please don't forget to fill out an evaluation. You can leave them back there at my little workstation in the corner, or leave them on the front table and we'll pick them up. But please do fill these out because I, honest to goodness, read them, and it does really shape actually what we do in these trainings and how we structure things. Yeah, so that is that. And then we do have some interactive stuff for this last bit, so so don't feel like you're going to be like, you know, staring at a PowerPoint wanting to leave. Okay, so as I said earlier today, I'm Denise. I'm the Executive Director of QLaw Foundation and in charge overall of our LGBTQ legal clinics and legal clinical programs and the whole shebang. This is my wonderful partner in presentation today, Kelsey Shamrell Harrington. Kelsey is an immigration attorney at Entre Hermanos, one of our community partners that we work with really closely. And Kelsey, prior to being a badass immigration attorney, also worked for 211, which many of you may know as the sort of one-stop shop in King County for referrals and about just about anything that a person might humanly need. And so Kelsey is a great resource. I'm going to be doing a little bit of an in-depth on referrals because when we did our volunteer survey this last fall, like astronomically, all of you wanted more information on referrals. So ask and you shall receive. And so what we're trying to do is actually go a little bit deeper in referrals rather than wider, right? Because you all are smart people who can use the Google. And so if you're looking for a broad spectrum of like what's available out there, there's Google, Ingersoll has amazing resources, several other places have amazing resources. And it's really hard to tell which of those resources are LGBTQ friendly / competent. And so I've kind of given you a profile of some of those resources in these materials, and we're working on getting that in the clinic bin also for folks while you're at clinic, so that while you're meeting with somebody you have a little bit more of an in-depth understanding of where we can send folks. Because I know that the referral vortex is real, if you don't know what I mean, but when I say that, what I mean is for a while we had it actually with NERP, bless them, they do really amazing work, the Northwest Immigrants' Rights Project, where we would see, oh, you have an immigration question, go talk to NERP, and then NERP would say, oh, you have an LGBTQ question, go talk to QLaw, and then like clients would ping pong back and forth, which is not pleasant for anyone. And so part of what we, the other thing that is real is that sometimes you refer our communities to places where LGBTQ stuff is not on their radar or not front and center, or they have a weird issue that kind of falls on the edge of a service category that the service provider has. And so that's why when I was talking to you all earlier in the intro, I said, if you have a client like that, just write down what the issue is, write down what it is that they need and what the barrier is to accessing that, because we have the ability as an organization, because we have all this legal system access and privilege, to call people up on the phone because we know each other, and I can call up the person at NJP or call up Kelsey or call up other people and say, hey, we have this person who's a little bit on the edge, but they really need help, and let's make the case to get this person help. So,
see also.
Here. There you go.
See also like a situation where you have, say, a really hard to find language to be interpreted, and you're thinking, okay, how is this person going to call into this place that doesn't have a contract with a language interpreter? We can often in the background kind of figure out beforehand, like, hey, we're going to have this Maya Quiche speaker who's going to need to see you on Thursday. Can you try and have someone available at that time to interpret? And that usually goes a lot better than sitting there on the language line while the single Maya Quiche interpreter is on an 1.5-hour asylum interview.
So, with no further ado, we're going to talk a little bit about what kind of referral needs are most common. I picked some based on my experiences. Domestic violence and survivor resources, that's a huge need. Sometimes it is, oh my gosh, where do I go get a DVPO, a domestic violence protection order, a sexual assault protection order. Other times it's, I actually don't care that much about the piece of paper because the piece of paper isn't going to do me a damn bit of good if I don't have a safety plan. And I don't know how to make a safety plan because I'm not a domestic violence advocate.
And if you're in the middle of a domestic violence situation, that's not the moment that you want to learn whether so-and-so who's answering the phone at the 4 o'clock shift at such-and-so DV org is going to hang up on you because your voice doesn't sound like what they expect from a woman, for example.
Real talk. Long-term representation in family law is another huge need. Immigration support is a huge need. Filing a lawsuit / discrimination. So I initially wrote filing a lawsuit. Actually, sometimes people don't. Sometimes people are like, yep, I want to file a lawsuit, and that is the thing I want to do. And I'm like, awesome, let's talk about how to help you do that. Other times they're like, this bad thing happened, and I'm pretty sure it was illegal, and I want to hold the bad thing doer accountable. And then the question is, okay, what's the pathway? And then legal parentage for adoption and other kinds of sort of legal relationships between parents and kids that can be a big, but there's a lot of them. So you all are smart people who have been doing this work. Are there other areas that are coming up a lot for you in either the legal clinic context or other sort of clinical work that you're doing that is not on this list that you want to talk about? That we can take a few minutes to dive into? Okay, well, if you think of one, I will ask the question again in a little bit. Okay, so domestic violence and survivors. So I've sort of broken each of these areas down into like, what are the questions you want to ask? And then, what are the things you need to know to figure out where this person is? And then we'll turn to a couple of, I've given you like at least two to three resources in each area so that you can get to know them relatively well. So if somebody is coming in saying, essentially, they're not always going to say, hi, I am a survivor of domestic violence, right? They're going to say, I have this relationship and it's really scary. Or they're going to say, I have an abuser, or I have a stalker, or this person hit me, or this person says they're going to hit me. And so the question you want to ask them is, are you in danger now? So when you go home from this appointment, are you going home into danger? Or are you staying somewhere else? Are you safe right now? Do you have a safety plan? And so that is a question that will gauge not only how safe is this person, but also will gauge how engaged are they already with resources. Because if they know what a safety plan is, they may already be engaged with resources. And that means you don't have to refer them to someone who can help them make a safety plan. But those are the two questions you always want to ask first, because people may be getting feedback from their friends or their community members or their family saying, you need to go get a protection order, and really what that person needs is to be safe today, now. And they may need that information from you. Do you have a hearing coming up? Because that tells you, do you already have a legal process, and do we have to be thinking about a deadline? Do you feel like you need a protection order? Do you have kids? That affects not just the safety plan, but also what kind of referral they're going to fall into the service priorities for. And have you separated your finances from the person? Because that's an additional area where a lot of abuse happens and a lot of safety can be threatened, but that's an important question to ask. So some resources. Northwest Network. How many of you have heard of Northwest Network? Okay, good. I'm really glad to hear that. I love Northwest Network. I've had the opportunity in my private practice mostly to sort of co-support clients together, and have just found them to be really, they're very client agency centered. So they are, what I sort of have spelled out is it LGBTQ centered or LGBTQ supportive, or neither of those, which doesn't necessarily mean unsupportive. It just means serving our community is not in the core of their mission. So Northwest Network is specifically LGBTQ centered. They are IBPOC, for folks who don't know that acronym, is Indigenous Black People and People of Color. So they are supportive of Indigenous Black and person of color communities. They do advocacy-based counseling, safety planning, and a bunch of other resources. They have like relationship skills classes that are kind of cool. They do some youth work. And so this is best to use for, you can actually refer, even if folks are not specifically in a domestic violence or intimate partner violence situation. For example, I have reached out to them for support for folks that experienced an assault at school, and there were police involved and school officials involved, and everybody wants to do an investigation, and the family was like, we need to understand how to engage with all of these agencies and keep ourselves at the center, and they offer support around that. So it's a really good wraparound resource. Sexual Violence Law Center, very happily, now a program of Legal Voice, which is really badass. And also my next door neighbor over at the CLE Foundation office, which is really lucky for me. I don't know how they feel about it because I'm always in there saying hi, but they are specifically LGBTQ supportive and Indigenous Black people of color supportive. And they provide legal representation at hearings. So this is a good destination for folks who have experienced domestic violence or assault and have a hearing date set, or who actually need to go get that order. They have some good online resources on their website. They also have a legal helpline. Okay, long-term family law. This is a sticky one. It's really tough. So important questions to ask when somebody says, you know, I'm getting divorced, or I have a custody dispute, or, you know, I have a family law issue, is, do you have kids? Because that tells you, again, what service priorities you're working with and also what legal questions you're working with. Have you separated your finances? If their answer is no, but they are separated, I will just tell you that you should tell them to separate their finances. You know, set up their own bank account, change all their passwords, and have their paychecks start going into the other bank account. Don't, you know, don't go to the casino and spend all your money, but it's okay to make your own bank account. Have you filed anything with the court? Because again, that tells you where are they in the process and what information do they need, and also are there deadlines? Are you in danger? I cannot tell you how many cases started out in my private practice as being like, this is going to be a pretty smooth divorce, and then suddenly there's a DVPO. And what are you most concerned about? And that last question is really important because divorce and custody is like a huge area. Family law is a huge area. And so really what you want to ask your client is like, where are we starting, right? Why are you here? Do you need the big overview, or do you have a really, like, what is your worst case scenario here? Because that will help you get right to what their challenge is. So family law long-term representation is tough, particularly for folks who are low income, or frankly, most of us who are like regular old people income, like middle income, because most family law attorneys are private attorneys that are for pay and charge, you know, usually $150 an hour is a pretty cheap rate. So, so that's hard. So I'm giving you some resources for, like, you know, normal ass people, because those are the people that come to our clinics. People who can pay for family law. Sometimes they come to our clinic, but I'm giving you some of the more middle to low income resources. So Northwest Justice Project, not specifically LGBTQ. They are often supportive, but we have heard from clients that their intake line is a little hit or miss. So we're working with them on that. Low income, meaning under 200% of the federal poverty line only. We'll get to that later. We'll get to that later. It's going to be super fun. There's math. Not really. They are often overwhelmed, and the clear line is the destination for that. And I didn't give you guys like the step one to get in, because you all can read Google, Google and read things. It can be hard to get through on their phone line because it's a really maxed out resource. And their area of focus, because their mandate is to serve all civil legal needs for low income folks, they have to have areas of focus because there's just not enough to go around. So they're a good resource if there's domestic violence and kids and family law combined, and they are very low income. And it's also a great resource if there are several intersecting areas of need. So if there's benefits, if there's housing issues, and there's family law, any of those issues. NJP is like, basically if you're talking to somebody who's like really, really poor, they have sort of a civil legal needs question, and NJP is going to be a resource you're going to want to give them, but you have to prep them that it's going to be hard to get through the clear line. If you have something time sensitive or something is a hot mess, write that in their client description, because then I can call NJP and sometimes give them a little path. Lavender Rights Project does do a little bit of family law. They are LGBTQ centered, QTPOC supportive. They do low to middle income, so that's 200 to 400% of the poverty line. They're pretty overburdened. I think there's like 4 or 5 attorneys, maybe, and they are the only LGBTQ specific long-term needs legal services provider in the state. So they're doing a lot. So slow turnaround. So if somebody's got a hearing tomorrow, don't send them there. Somebody's got a hearing tomorrow, you should be coaching them on how to ask for a continuance so they can find counsel. So you're going to want to use Lavender Rights Project for some people who have some income and a really specific need for LGBTQ support. They do some low income stuff, but it's mostly, I think, middle income. And then there's the Washington State Bar Association Moderate Means Project. It's not LGBTQ centered. Basically, it's a voluntary program that lawyers volunteer for, where you volunteer to, you are willing to lower your hourly rate in relationship to your client's income. And you can only be between 200 and 400% of the federal poverty line. So if you want, if it's a family law lawyer who typically charges $600 an hour, I don't know any that do, but let's pretend, then they may be reducing their rate by 75%, and you're still paying a lot of money. If it's somebody who has a more normal rate, like 150, 225, something like that, you can get up to 75% reduction, and that can make it much more manageable. They have some, they're good for use outside of King County and Seattle. Usually divorce is an area where they have a lot of attorneys, and there's some ability to pay. Okay, immigration support. You want to take this one?
I would love to take this one away. So the very first thing that you should be asking is not what I wrote on the slide. The very first thing you should be asking is probably, does immigration know about you? If immigration doesn't know about the person, they don't have an A number, and we probably want it to stay that way until we have some really solid support lined up. Like, citizen, marriage certificate already complete, okay, good. And we already did all the checks, like, are they on one of those lists of, 10,000 things you could have done that makes you ineligible to, according to United States law, to naturalize or to immigrate or to obtain permanent residency. But assuming that the person is in the system, the most powerful piece of information that I can get, if you're going to be making a referral to me or any other immigration attorney, is this person's A number. If you pick a 9-digit number and throw it at me and it's someone's A number, there's a phone number I can call. And I can find out what that person's current status is, if any, when their next hearing is, before what court that hearing is, whether there are any appeals pending, whether they're detained, if they are detained, where they're detained. I can find out a whole host of information, and so can my non-attorney next door neighbor, if they have that A number. Interestingly enough, this means so can you. But the really important thing is, if you're going to be sending an attorney who specializes in immigration or referral for this person, if you can get that A number on there, immediately we can do a lot of pre-screening. So I can say, okay, we know that this person has a hearing in a few weeks, so we know that we can't, file any big motions for this, or we know that this person is on appeal, so they've got a little while to wait because it's not likely that this is going to be adjudicated for a few months. Date and place of birth are pretty important. And why is that important? Because it's one of the things that's requested to be able to file a FOIA request for somebody's A file. So if I can get the date and place of birth, and that's both city and country, so maybe it's Santa Barbara, Honduras, that's going to be really helpful for me in narrowing down not only who this individual is, but also what forms of relief they might be eligible for. When I call the immigration line, it doesn't necessarily tell me the country of origin, but if I can get the country of origin, I can say, if we can get this person out on parole, they're automatically eligible to adjust for permanent residency. Because why? Because they're from Cuba, and the Cuban Adjustment Act might apply. So we actually had that happen within the last couple of weeks, which was really exciting for us. Is the immigrant currently detained? I say this because a lot of times if someone is detained, their family members or their loved ones or their found family, especially in the case of our queer community, are going to be the ones who are calling saying, please can you help this person, they're detained, they don't have an attorney. Because when you're detained, you basically are not able to do anything except worry about your case, and when you can finally earn enough money working for $1 for a day's work, that'll buy you enough minutes to make a phone call to ask, please, have you had any luck with looking for an attorney? If the person's detained, that's going to change not only what they're eligible for, but it's going to change the timeline of their case in a big way. Typically, if someone's detained and they are not waiting for an appeal, but are coming up on their first court individual hearing, we're looking at a timeline of maybe a couple months at most before they get into court. And after that, when they're set for an individual calendar hearing, they'll be just a month or so later. So pretty quick turnaround time compared to in the outside, where you might be waiting 6 or 7 months before they get around to giving you your master calendar hearing, and then at that point they give you an individual merits hearing that's 2 or 3 years out. Do you know your legal status? One thing about immigration law is that it's sort of like tax law in that there are a lot of weird little complexities that never come up until that client comes in where it does apply. And you're like, oh, okay, I vaguely remember hearing about this in immigration law class. Let me see if I can find that part of the INA. People don't always know their legal status. A good example of this is withholding of removal. If someone applies for asylum, they might be denied asylum on the basis of, say, the recent asylum ban. Maybe they entered the country after July 16th, 2019, and can't prove that they miraculously applied in Mexico for asylum within the 30 days that you're allowed to do that, and have a final order denying them. And if they're not eligible for asylum because of that rule, but they're eligible in every other way, they might get some sort of limbo status, like withholding, where you're not eligible to become a permanent resident, you can't bring any family over, but you're also probably not going to get deported unless the government changes its mind about whether the situation in your home country is safe to go back to. And a good way to ask this is what someone understands their immigration status to be, because sometimes the word that someone says might not be as telling as, oh, well, my attorney said that I might be able to apply for a work permit, but it's not guaranteed. If you tell me that, that tells me a lot more than it was something where I don't get removed. And do you have a court date? This is key because, like I said, turnaround times can be really generous, where it's 2 or 3 years out. We're thinking more along the lines of make sure you review your declaration so you still remember this in 6 years when your merits hearing comes up, rather than get it down before we're in front of the judge. And then it might be that it's more like get it down on paper so we can get it before the judge. It doesn't matter if it's pretty. It doesn't matter if you said the same sentence a few times. So knowing when the court date is going to be really key for a referral. And here's a really important one, is the best language. It's pretty easy to see when someone's not maybe a native English speaker that their best language is non-English. But what might be less obvious is, and I don't know if Robert mentioned this earlier, but a lot of people who are Spanish speaking presenting, which I say it to mean as Spanish is the most common language that they speak, that may not be their first language, and it may not be a language that they're really equipped to speak about their legal situation in. It might be that their best language is an indigenous language, and it frequently is, because some of the most vulnerable folks are people who are from those indigenous communities and haven't had as much community support, or may have been marginalized within their own countries. And of course, as LGBTQ folks, that's usually, you're usually looking at 3 or 4 levels of intersectionality at that point. So knowing what the best language is really helpful, because it can prevent us from wasting time kind of trying to slog through in Spanish, when really what we needed to do was arrange a mom interpreter. So for immigration support, pretty much if they're LGBTQ and they're Latino, and we can be a little squishy on Latino. Like, we recently had some trans women transferred from Santa Fe, Mexico's detention center, and it was 14 women, of whom all of them were from various Latin American countries, except for we had 2 from Jamaica. Same general colonizers, we'll go with it. The key issue is what we don't have is speakers for a lot of non-Spanish languages. So if it's a Mandarin speaker, if they're LGBTQ and no one else is serving them and we're sitting in our offices twiddling our thumbs, we might try to work something out. But probably it would be better to send them somewhere where there is that language support. And then also we do have a really robust medical program, because Entre Hermanos started 30 years ago as kind of the Latino response to POCAN and the AIDS crisis. And what we've been doing in those 30 years is largely medical case management and prevention for HIV. And then as our program grew more robust, it was like, hey, a lot of our Latino LGBTQ folks, in addition to wanting to keep themselves healthy, are also wondering about their immigration problems. And then suddenly we have an immigration department. So what this means is not only are we competent about these issues, we actually kind of specialize in them. So if you've got a client who's like maybe not so gay, but like pretty imputed gay, but they're also HIV positive, yeah, go ahead and send them over. Or if they're accessing PrEP, we do a lot of case management around that. Do you all know what PrEP is? Yeah, I know, I'm presenting to a bunch of gay folks, I should have known. Big thing, we don't get federal funding. We don't care if they're a little bit above the federal poverty level. We're not going to probably serve, and actually an interesting part of our services is we will literally do an HIV test for anyone. You could be making $500,000 a year, and if you happen to wander in, yeah, sure, we'll prick your finger. We're getting paid for it by the county anyway. And a lot of people do come into like someplace that doesn't match their community because of an anonymity. But it also applies to immigration. So yes, we are absolutely going to prioritize our low-income folks. You may really want your work permit or your family application, but we're always going to prioritize the detained trans woman who needs our help. That said, you're welcome to come in for a consult and we'll see what we can do. For NERP, first of all, they're amazing. They're a little bit overworked, a lot overworked. They're really great at like kind of the litigation, class actions, complex cases, weird stuff. They do have strict income requirements though. So if you have someone who's not anywhere close to LGBTQ and definitely not under that 200% federal poverty level, you probably want to look to contacting us for another referral. There are other places, but we don't want to go through all the list. Any questions about this? No, get to the important stuff. Okay.
Great. So I'll talk a little bit about discrimination. And discrimination I'm using broadly to refer to employment discrimination, housing discrimination, public accommodations discrimination, which is just a fancy way of saying I walked into a business and they weren't jerks to me. And that also applies to hospitals and prisons and shelters. I have big feelings about shelters right now.
Yeah.
So the question that you want to ask is, what city or county did the incident or incidents happen in? Because what you're trying to do is identify the jurisdiction. When did the incidents happen? What you're trying to do is figure out, sometimes people will see our resource, you know, particularly right now as there's so much conversation around sexual harassment sort of in our culture, and so many people bravely speaking up and normalizing speaking up about it. What we are seeing is a wave of people who have very old experiences, who have never been able to speak about them before, and it has never felt possible that there could be a remedy for them. And those folks are coming to us. And so one of the resources that we provide is that we can be a listening ear for those folks. They may or may not have a live claim, particularly if it's, you know, I walked into this pizzeria and they, you know, wouldn't serve me. Those incidents typically have to happen within 180 days or 3 years, depending on what we're talking about.
But there's no statute of limitations on compassion, which is something that we are prepared to offer.
Oh my gosh, so I think, I think you just gave me our like pride sticker idea. Yes! I've been like, okay, so I really want to like up our stuff for pride because it's like been really boring in the past because it's lawyers doing graphic design. And I was like, okay, we need a really cute, like catchy sticker. So
yeah, I'll sign off on that.
Go ahead. I love it.
I'll already charge you.
All right.
Shirt. I want the shirt.
You want the shirt? Okay. I'll pay you in stickers. How's that? Okay. So anyway, who is the complaint against? Is it a hospital? Is it a school? Is it an employer? Is it an employer? Again, you don't have to know everything about each of these things. It just kind of changes the universe you're talking about. And then what is your goal? So maybe the person is like, I got fired from my job because I'm trans, and I want my back pay. Maybe it's, I want to make them pay so much money it hurts them. Fair, right? And maybe it's, I just want to be able to go to work tomorrow and have them use the right pronouns, right? Or like not answer questions about like, you know, which one between me and my wife is the guy, you know, like there's...
Or even, I found a better job, but I don't want this to happen to the next person. I want to make sure Alice in accounting, who isn't out to everyone yet, doesn't have the same experience I had.
Right. I will tell you, in 10 years of employment discrimination work, I have never had a client who was like, I don't care if it happens to anybody else, I just want to get my money, right? They're always just like, I don't actually, like, I want to get money because that is how our legal system deals with pain, is we deal with pain using money, right? It sucks, but that's real. And so, but they will always say, you know, if like the money is whatever the money is, I do not want them to get away with this. I do not want this to be the practice in this place. I do not want somebody else who goes to get medical care from this doctor to have the experience that I did because it was terrible, right? Every one of these conversations makes me love our community more deeply because we are always thinking about the next person down the line. And that is really compelling, and that is something that we get the opportunity as volunteer lawyers to hold for them. Okay, so while I get myself all charged up on the end of a day. So the Seattle Office for Civil Rights is one destination to send people to. It has to be within Seattle city limits. Depending on the issue, you have 12 or 18 months to report. They can enforce in a broad range of areas. One thing to know about Seattle Office for Civil Rights, and this is also true for our statewide Human Rights Commission, I did not list them as a resource because they are underfunded and take approximately 100 years to investigate things. It is not their fault. They are super underfunded. I think they have like 3 investigators for the whole state, and discrimination is much more rampant than that. So I do not envy them, but they just take forever and a day. But with both of those agencies, they do have some alternative dispute resolution available, and you do not need to have a lawyer to access it. So this is a neutral agency. They're not going to be your advocate, but if you file a complaint and the person can articulate what the discrimination is, and I very much encourage you to spend the time with them to write the complaint with them. Don't just give them the form and be like, have fun, friend. write it with them. Help them write the story, because our skill is in writing a story that ticks all the boxes and says all the magic, hi, there was discrimination words. But other folks don't speak that language, and it's our job to help them tell their story to the agency in a way that will help the agency listen. But what they can do is, if both parties are willing to sit down and talk about a resolution, they do have that ability within the agency context. So usually what they'll say is, do you want, I forget the word is, what the word is that they use for it, but do you want to mediate? Do you want a settlement conference? And they'll put the investigation on hold if both parties say yes. So you don't get an answer about, whether Bill from accounting really did call you that name. But that can be good, because sometimes they don't see discrimination unless there's like a giant neon sign pointing towards it. Unless Bill from accounting was like, hell yeah, I said that name, right? And so what this can do is basically like call it square. They can get a little bit of money, which can feel like a lot of money, and move on with their life. It's not the right option for everybody, but it is an option. Other options for employment, there is the WELA directory. WELA is the Washington Employment Lawyers Association. It is a directory of private practice, plaintiff-side employment litigators. It is not LGBTQ centered. It is my previous world, so I know many of the folks well. So if you have an employment discrimination issue, write that down. Tell them that you sent them to WELA, and that way I can follow up with the client and be like, hi, who'd you call? Let me help you find a person who's going to be the right fit for you, because I know all these people. It is often contingency fee based with a consultation fee. So a person can look at spending, some employment attorneys have free consultations. Others will charge like $300 for an initial consultation, and then usually it's a contingency fee from there. So use it if there is evidence of employment discrimination or harassment. Evidence can be testimony, so it doesn't have to be like, here's the email where they called me that name. It's, they have a clear story of discrimination that points back to the protected class. Within the last 3 years, because that's the statute of limitations for private claims. And there needs to be lost wages, or at least some question of whether there's compensation there. Lavender Rights Project also does some discrimination work. Again, they're overloaded, so they're not the only destination. That would not be the only referral I would give someone. But particularly if you have a trans client that maybe doesn't have super big economic damages, true for many people in our communities, because our communities are pretty systematically underpaid and underemployed. Or if there's if there's an ongoing issue, Lavender Rights Project is really good at coming in where the employee is still working there, or the person receiving services there's an ongoing relationship, and they can come in and say, hi, friends, you are actually not following the law right now. Here are the things that you need to do differently. And they can really effectively negotiate those relationships, which frankly is better than any lawsuit. It's way more effective than any settlement I have ever gotten. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
If we refer to the Office of Civil Rights, does that have any effect on the statute of limitations for these other options?
So the question was, if you refer one of these cases to the Office of Civil Rights, does that have any effect on the statute of limitations for these cases?
Short answer, no. So you can go to Office of Civil Rights. You still need to figure out within 3 years if you want to file a lawsuit. Okay, legal parentage and adoption. Some questions to ask. Does the family live in King County? Is their legal parentage uncontested? Meaning, is there somebody else who's going to say, no, you're not a parent, or somebody else who's going to be on the other side of the table saying, I am a parent and you're not, or they aren't, or, are we fighting, or is everybody pretty much on the same page and we just need some paperwork done? Even if the parents are getting divorced, that's fine. And I'm talking about, sorry, I should do this in a different order. We have the Family Matters Clinic. It is a legal clinic that serves people in King County for legal parentage and second parent adoptions. So it is a way for families to get these documents that I always say, like, you don't need them on the best day of your life, you need them on the worst day of your life. And it's the document where, like, something tragic happens to one of the parents and somebody wants to be homophobic or transphobic about it and not let the other parent or another parent do their job, right? Take the kids, make medical decisions, whatever it is. And these are the documents that you know, pull out of the Ziploc baggie in your safe deposit box, or pull out of your suitcase and you say, look, MFer, this is my family, back off.
And for getting divorced is okay. Correct me if I'm wrong, but what I understand that to mean, Denise, is that, you know, say my wife and I have a kid together and we know we're getting divorced, but we also absolutely believe that we're both supposed to be the parents, and we don't want our divorce to make that other parent suddenly not be seen as a legal parent. Am I correct in that assumption?
Correct, yes. And it can also be, you know, at the separation stage, post-divorce. Really, it's just that, like, what we cannot be in the business of is terminating a queer person's parental rights. That is outside of our funding. But other than that, we're good. Because, you know, our families are creative, and sometimes when creative families have hard times, it gets messy. And so we are here for the mess. And then the other question is there, you know, it may be that it's not that there's a contested parentage, but one parent is absent, right? Which happens a lot, right? Like, you have a relationship, maybe you have a marriage, a child is born out of that relationship, and then one person is out, and, you know, maybe they move away, maybe you haven't talked to them in years, maybe they don't have zero interest in being a parent to your child. That is actually fine, because, and I'm not doing a whole presentation on adoption right now, but I will just say that a child in Washington can have as many parents as that child has, as many people are performing parenting duties. So you could have a parent that lives, you know, somewhere else and is not around, and maybe you don't feel like going through the process of terminating that person's rights, but you want to have you want that person to have that child to have a second parent or a third parent, right? Like, those things, those legal orders are totally fine. And we can do that through our Family Matters Clinic, and basically you would just flag it for me that it's a Family Matters Clinic client. There's also a registration form on our website that families can go directly to. Yeah.
Can I just ask, so just to clarify, so you had mentioned that terminating the rights of an LGBT parent is outside of the funding. So in that situation that you mentioned, like, if the legal question was needing to terminate that parent's right, but that person is an LGBT person, would that be a case that this clinic would not be able to take?
I'm going to give you the lawyerly answer and say it depends. Because there's definitely scenarios where it would be actually totally fine.
Right.
Particularly if the person agrees, like, you know, if they're like, nope, never performed parenting duties, don't want to perform parenting duties, not interested in this, that's a different scenario than somebody who says, I am a parent, but somebody else is trying to terminate those rights.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering if you've ever, and I know this is a new clinic, but ever done anything creative around minors wanting a name change. In my experience, there's usually one supportive parent and maybe one parent who's not. And so I'm just wondering if you've ever either negotiated an agreement between parents who are still married but don't agree regarding a name change or gender identity, or sought a court order allowing one parent to consent either to medical decisions and name change stuff.
That is a really good question. So I have thought about this, and I do not think it fits under this grant. That doesn't mean that we cannot be a support for that family, because that is a super real situation. And I think we have a pool of family law attorneys that are in private practice that can either, depending on the family's circumstances, can offer support at varying levels. And I feel like, I'm not holding any of them to this, but I feel like I can probably sweet talk them into some reduced rates as well. Because this is a need that we're seeing pretty frequently. And in King County with the judges, we feel okay. Now watch, I'm gonna say that and some judge is gonna do something wild. But King County is generally okay. It's judges in counties outside of King County where those motions are having to be made, where it's really like a lot of education and there's kind of a technique for those motions. So short version is probably not this program, but longer version is send them to us anyway because we'll help them work it out, because that's super real. Okay, any other needs? So remember how I said I would come back and ask you all again? So I'm asking again, any other needs that you see come up frequently?
I can't say that I see it come up frequently, but I just remembered I think it used to be called the Community Law Center for Public Benefits issues, and I think that they might be able to help. I know they're not centered around our community's needs. But one thing that popped up during your presentation was, as QLaw has the foundation thought about doing like a stamp of approval for like pro bono attorneys who have started practices and says, we're willing to take on clients, we don't have, and maybe offer some questionnaires to test their competency or friendliness to the, or just say, why do you think you want to do that? And maybe for sliding scale folks.
So that is a really good idea. Okay. To answer your first thing, yes, Seattle Community Law Center is now called the Benefits Law Center, and they are fantastic. They handle federal benefits. Solid Ground has a state benefits program. So those are the two referrals. Federal is Benefits Law Center, state is Solid Ground. And both of them are, I would say, LGBTQ engaged, which is a way of saying, like, I see them a lot, they're super on board with us, like, you know, we tend to, when we run into each other at meetings, we tend to speak the same language, which means that I generally feel pretty good sending folks there. They're engaged with our, like, legal community queer education work. But I have not, like, we don't have a stamp of approval because lots of reasons. But I will also say that for the low bono thing, I think that's a really good idea. And it's just not something like, I've been working on trying to get a pro bono network rolled out or low bono network rolled out. And that's definitely kind of on the horizon, but it's not something that we've had capacity to do. I will say Ingersoll is starting up a legal consult group, which is specifically geared towards legal service providers, attorneys, and or staff that are serving trans-identified folks and want to have a cohort of folks to talk to about it and get some education around it. That is a resource that is also in process. So, and we've been working together a little bit on it, but really Ingersoll has a great model for this that they've used with healthcare providers for many years, and it's very successful. And so I think that will be a really great resource too.
One of the things that I commonly get that I haven't seen a resource for is landlord-tenant issues.
Yeah. I'm glad you raised your hand because I was like, whoa, man.
I'm really glad you asked this question because I thought earlier I wanted to say something about the home base program, which many people, like, there's just not a lot of information out there, but the Mariners donated like a bunch of money and gave it to, it's funneled through Catholic Charities that goes to the housing justice projects that are at the county courthouses, so Kent and Seattle. The only way to access those funds are to go to Housing Justice Project and apply for assistance through them, and then they can arrange for paying back rent. I don't even know all of the things because obviously it's been kind of a closely guarded secret, and I think that's really wrong. So I would say Housing Justice Project should absolutely be people's first stop. Northwest Justice Project does do some landlord-tenant stuff, but it's really hard to get through there. I assume Lavender might?
Not that I know of.
I mean, the King County Bar Association would. But commonly, because rents are so high, the biggest problem is non-payment. And so then I guess I would say Housing Justice Project really is the place to start. Thank you for asking that so I could tell you about the home base program.
Not really my circus, but I would also say if it's housing specific and the person is trans identified, Ingersoll might be able to help them with a small portion of rent support. All right, so we might go through these slides a little quickly. Federal poverty guidelines, basically they may be a pain, but if anyone is using federal funding, they're going to use the federal poverty guidelines. So we're going to whip through this really fast. They're published every year in the Federal Register. At the time I wrote these slides, which was not even in the past week. They had not been published yet. But so I've got the 2019 guidelines on here. They're used for eligibility for public benefits and also for by legal aid providers. If you haven't got this slide printed out, you might want to find a buddy who does. You can look at the slides to figure out how to count income, but basically it's going to be any earned income from work, any income from benefits, and any child support that they've gotten. You can sometimes subtract business expenses if it's someone who's self-employed and is like purchasing their own inventory or tools, or medical expenses. In particular, we know that NJP has been known to allow people to deduct medical expenses if they're really close to the line. Hey.
Is it for the calendar year starting?
It's for the calendar year, I believe, starting on January 1st, going through the end of December. Is that correct for the
Well, no, it's until the next federal poverty guidelines come out, actually.
Oh, no, but for counting.
For counting income, I believe that it's based on the income of a calendar year. So if I'm trying to figure out whether they
As
made
someone who has made the referrals to the legal organizations, I think if you can make it work in any way, do it that way. If it works monthly but not annually, do it monthly. If it works, you know, if it works because they lost their job this week and we're now at 0, count it that way.
Okay.
If they just got a really good job, maybe see if you can count the calendar year. Who's in a household? It really depends. It depends on the program. It depends, you know, if you're looking at food benefits, it's going to be different from medical benefits, who's in your household. Generally, it's people who consider themselves a family together and share money. It's generally not going to include separate roommates. You know, the adult child who's 32 and lives in-house but has their own kind of finances going on, or people who are staying over temporarily. However, there's no formal relationship required for someone to be part of the same household. This is where I got to feel like I was a lawyer making a presentation and put aside. So, TANF, they've got this description under WAC 388-408-0015. Basic food, they've got this other decision based on who buys and prepares food together. So if you've got a polycule of 7 individuals who none of them have ever been married, and you know they've been together for 7 days or 7 years, because 7. Yeah, that's a household for food, and you're going to have to count each of their income if they're all sharing and preparing food together to determine if they're eligible for basic food. And you're going to probably do the same thing with federal poverty guidelines for the different organizations, but then you'll find that some programs it's only, you know, your spouse and children and something else. So basically, be flexible in your thinking, think outside the box, and if there's any of those scenarios in which they might be eligible, go ahead and make the referral and we'll figure it out. Time to practice. So I wrote this up. It's long. Basically, the idea is when you get someone presenting, they're not going to come and say, "Hi, I'm in a household with so-and-so." You're going to get the whole story, and people are going to come out of the woodwork 3/4 of the way through the story who were definitely not in the household as part of the legal problem that you had constructed in your mind until that point. So Kendra and Danielle are roommates. They split their rent evenly, and they have a chore schedule for taking out the trash and recycling. They're friends. They sometimes eat together, but they mostly do their own meals. Quick check-in. Are these people sounding like they're part of a household together? Probably not. Recently, Kendra started dating Miles, who's non-binary, and they have a 6-year-old child with disabilities. For the last 3 months, Miles and their child have been staying in the apartment that Kendra and Danielle rent. What does this raise in your mind? They might be part of a household together. The landlord's starting to make a fuss since Miles and their child are not on the lease. Kendra has come into the clinic for advice. Danielle works full-time at a bank and makes $2,500 per month. Kendra's working part-time for $1,800 a month. Miles is not employed but sells things on Etsy and makes about $150 a month. Miles' child receives $649 a month for SSI. It looks like a really complicated math problem. It can be. But basically, here's what you're looking for. First of all, who is the question being asked about? and who is necessarily part of that person's household. So in this case, the question hasn't been defined yet. But you know that it's going to be something about the household of Kendra and Miles and the child because it's about the lease. So you might or might not be counting Kendra. So you want to ask, what else do you need to know from Kendra? What are you going to advise Kendra to do? Let's assume that we think NJP could help, but we need to screen for income. Who's in the household and whose income must be counted for referrals that require an income below 200% federal poverty limit. So in this case, we're going to look at that Etsy income, we're going to look at that SSI income, and depending on how we calculate it, we might be including Kendra's income. So, case study. The next month, Danielle comes into the clinic because she's about to lose her job at the bank. HR has told her that if she does not start presenting in a more feminine way and wearing makeup, she will be written up. Danielle is saving up for gender-affirming surgery and does not want to spend her money on makeup while she does that. And I guess she just doesn't want to wear the Ingersoll brand, sorry. Her bank does not have a dress code, but ever since she asked her manager to start using she and her pronouns and changed her name to Danielle, it seems like she can't do anything right. It's like they're making excuses to say she has bad behavior. She also really wants to change her name but can't afford it right now. She wants to know if she should just quit. So this is how I wrote it up because this is really how it presents rather than, you know, people don't usually come and ask the legal question. That's part of what we tease out. In this case, Danielle's probably not going to qualify for anything that requires below 200% federal poverty level because if we look at those slides, the federal poverty level for a single person household for a month is going to be about $2,080 and she made $2,500 according to the fact pattern. However, she might well fit into that 200 to 400% federal poverty level because that's well under the 4,160. See, there is math involved. And so what you might do is look at Lavender Wright's project because she's not below 200%, but she is in that kind of middling low income area. I would say at this point you'd probably be writing to Denise because this is definitely a gender identity discrimination in a workplace type of a situation. And you might be looking at some of those city or county resources depending, I don't know if we defined what jurisdiction they live in. All right, so we're gonna see if there's any time left and we're gonna do a quick group chat.
We've got about 10 minutes, so here's what we're gonna do. Pair up or trio up. Thank you. Pair up or trio up and look at case study number 3 about Davi, Lucretia, and Keenan. And what you're going to do is if you can find a polycule that has at least one attorney in it, that will help you. I mean, not in life, but in this exercise. That will help because then you can have you can do the advising part of it. And so we have intake sheets, one for Lucretia and one for Keenan, because we're short on time. Rather than have you do both people's sort of legal perspectives, just choose one. The attorney will be working with Lucretia or the attorney will be working with Keenan. What are their legal questions and what is their what can you refer them to based on what their legal questions are and their income level. So use all of the skills. You are role playing, so make life difficult for your attorney, please, because life is not easy in the clinic. So you're going to get an intake sheet. This is meant to replicate the clinic experience. So whichever client you choose, you're going to get an intake sheet that has their info filled in on it. Just like you would at the clinic assistant would give the attorney the intake sheet with the front side filled out with some of the demographic information of the client. And so this is a good opportunity for the attorneys to kind of roll with what it looks like to get that and fill it out.
And get an investigation if there's already.
So finish up your consultations. Thank you, attorneys, for your service. Thank you, clients, for sharing your deep and beautiful stories.
Oh, it's amazing.
Okay. Chelsea, do you wanna field the questions, or do you want me to? Like, have folks report back?
There is a theory called.
Okay, so, real quick like bunnies. So who did you determine was in the household with Davi, Lucretia, and Keenan and their sweet little one? Who was in their household?
All four.
All four. That's all right? Great. I don't actually know. And then whose income is counted? If we're looking at referrals that require an income below 200% the federal poverty line, whose income are we looking at?
It looked like Lucretia and Davy, looks like it.
Lucretia and Davy?
Yeah.
Got it. Oh, I guess it would make sense that it would be Davy and not Davi. Okay, yeah. Okay, all right. Sorry, client. See, this is why you always ask the client what name they want you to use, is because sometimes it's pronounced oddly or normally, and whatever, it's pronounced how they pronounce it. Sorry. Whew, it's been a long day.
You're great.
Sometimes you guess wrong.
Sometimes you guess wrong.
It could be Dave with a silent I.
It could be Dave with a silent I. I like that one. Okay, great. So Keenan gets a job making $1,200 per month. At the same time, Lucretia's sister Jenny starts spending nights sleeping on the couch because she's in between housing situations. So now who's in the household? Still the four, right, because Jenny is not in the household because she's couch surfing. And then whose income is counted for referrals? The same income that was counted before. Ha, trick question. Okay, so what did you think about in terms of referrals for this family? Did you guys get to that?
Denise Diskin, we thought. Denise Diskin.
You thought Denise Diskin would be appropriate? Thanks, Martin.
Yeah.
We got something like
I appreciate the trust.
Well, the most immediate concern appeared to be some protection issues, and a referral would be to, if it's King County, to a DV advocate that they have at the court to assist them in preparing a motion and a proposed order for a protection order. But one of the issues you have to get to before that is who are the parents? Because it's not clear from the narrative that there's parents, and who's the biological parents, who's the acting parents, is there adoption involved, etc. It's the kind of thing that needs some follow-up before they can really pursue the protection order, and what documentation do they have for the parenting.
Yeah. So any other thoughts about that? I have thoughts, but I want to give the room time to chime in. Are there thoughts?
We talked just a little bit also about kind of assessing the urgency of the safety, and also realizing that maybe some of the resources that we have are kind of more geared towards like removing a person from the situation. And, you know, in this situation, you know, is it Keenan may not want to be separated from the rest of their family. So just trying to take that into account too.
Right, because if the ex is abusive and is targeting Keenan could disappear, but is the ex going to stop being abusive? Is the family safe? Maybe not, right? Yeah, so you have to think about the family as a unit.
I think for this family, I would want to have a conversation about treatment of going to like a DV provider and making sure it's going to be culturally competent for a polyamorous couple, and just kind of prepping them around that, and making sure that any trauma that might result from an inappropriate interaction, that they're prepared for it, or I don't know. I just would want to talk that out a bit more.
Where would you start with that?
With having that, kind of prepping that conversation, you know, I think I would say that when people go into court and when they engage with systems, many of those systems do not recognize LGBTQ families and how they're structured and how they're formed, and so just want to make sure that the client is aware that this DV agency may have never engaged with a throuple before or a polyamorous couple, particularly one who are kind of co-parenting a child, and just thinking through ways that they can present their story that it's going to feel safe for them, but also, honor their situation.
Yeah, so you might start, once you've figured out, do they have a safety plan, do they need a safety plan, right? And Northwest Network is a great referral for that. Get the family safe, make sure that they have a plan for next time abusive X rolls up, that they know what's going to happen, that they have their support systems in place, they have the safe place that they're going to go, they have their bag packed that has all their stuff in it, and that they can respond in that moment. You don't have to do all of that with them. I mean, those are basics, but we are not trained DV safety advocates, but you can send them to Northwest Network for that. And I think I would completely agree that prepping them, and I try to prep clients by asking questions like, tell me what your family structure is internally, right? How do you view each other? Because they might say, well, we've come up with a strategy where these two are the legal parents, and so they're the people who interact with the systems, right? Like, just like my partner's a social worker and I'm a lawyer, right? So he talks to the neighbors and I talk to the landlord, right? Everybody uses the skill that they have.
Yep.
And so they may have worked that out and they may have a plan and they may be totally prepared for, I'm going to interact with this system and it's going to be weird. They may also be like, that's super not what we are about. And there are definitely families that are like, you know what, it's actually really important to our family structure that we do not have a legal priority system. And so engaging with that resource at the court might not be the right one. They might be a better referral to the Sexual Violence Law Center or to the Lavender Rights Project. That might be the starting point rather than going to the court, because the court is dealing with everybody. And if they are folks who are really intensely interested in being in our community, that may not be, that may not be the right first stop. But it's all about how do you ask those questions and what do you prepare folks for.
The other question that I thought was really urgent was, who are the recognized parents of Davy? Because if the abusive ex isn't, then it's a really different situation if, like, the other recognized parent is Kian, than if the abusive ex is also still a recognized parent.
Yes.
And, like, that, I can't even start making referrals until I know what that situation is. And it's a difficult question because, they're all parents.
Right. Yeah. So you start with the affirming, I see that you are a family. And I will say, having done a lot of second parent adoptions, I really love when judges actually start the hearing this way, where they say, you are already a family. I'm just signing a legal document that says, legally, you are a family, but you are already a family. And I think really starting at that point with like, okay, we're going to lay the groundwork here. Clients, you are a family. Between you and me in this world, you are a family. I recognize and I see you. We're going to talk about what the legal system needs from you in order, and like, how do we strategize and use your family structure to your advantage in this system, right? Where it's sort of a life hack, right? We're hacking the system a little bit. So I'm going to cut off comments now, unless you have a final thing you want to say, just because we're a little over time.
I just want to say thank you all for engaging with, I intentionally created a messy pattern that didn't have all the facts you needed. Not messy because it's a non-standard family relationship, but messy because you don't know who the parents necessarily are in anyone's eyes, let alone the eyes of the law. So thank you all for coming, and I really hope that you can refer us some cases.
Awesome, thank you all. So I moved the evals to the end of the table, the Ingersoll sheet to the end of the table. So please grab those on your way out. Please do fill out the evals because we do use them. And if you wouldn't mind putting your dishes and trash away in the back, that just makes life easier for the custodial staff that cleans the room after we are done. So thank you all.
Thank you. And if
really hard today.
there's anything you wish that we could give training on, that's a great thing to put on the eval.